The massive space station floated in the neutral zone like a giant metallic flower, its arms stretching out to welcome ships from across the galaxy. This was the annual military showcase, where every species came to show off their best warships. It was like a deadly fashion show, but instead of clothes they displayed weapons that could destroy planets. Admiral Park Jin-woo stood on the bridge of the UES Thunder, looking out at the incredible sight before him. Hundreds of alien ships surrounded them, each one more bizarre and beautiful than the last. Some looked like living creatures made of metal and crystal, others resembled geometric puzzles that hurt to look at directly. His own ship felt plain in comparison, like bringing a hammer to an art gallery. "Look at that thing." Commander Lee So-min pointed to a ship that seemed to be made entirely of purple crystal. It hummed with energy, and small lightning bolts danced across its surface. The Zephyrians really outdid themselves this year. Park nodded, watching as the crystal ship performed its demonstration. It fired beams of pure energy that carved through asteroid targets like a hot knife through butter. The crowd of alien observers made appreciative sounds through their translation devices. Next came the bioships from the Verdant Collective. These vessels looked alive because they actually were alive. They pulsed with heartbeats, their hulls rippling like skin. When they fired their weapons, the ships seemed to breathe deeply first, then exhale streams of corrosive plasma that melted their targets completely. The ancient Valdorians went last among the major powers. Their ships looked like they were built from folded space itself, constantly shifting and changing shape. When they demonstrated their weapons, reality seemed to bend around the targets before they simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, just gone as if they had never been there at all. Then came humanity's turn. Park felt the weight of thousands of alien eyes focusing on his ship. The Thunder was a purely human design, built in the shipyards of Mars. It had sharp angles and functional lines, painted in military gray with minimal decoration. Compared to the artistic masterpieces around them, it looked like a tool rather than a work of art. "This should be interesting," came the voice of Ambassador Kang Min-ho from the diplomatic station. "Council observers prepare for human demonstration." Park could almost hear the alien observers shifting in their seats, probably expecting a boring display of primitive technology. Some species had been spacefaring for millions of years, while humans had only left their home planet a few centuries ago. What could these newcomers possibly show that would impress anyone? The first surprise came when the Thunder began to move. Instead of the graceful, predetermined patterns that other ships had followed, it darted and weaved like a fighter pilot in atmosphere. The alien observers leaned forward in their seats. This was not how capital ships were supposed to behave. The Thunder's engines didn't use exotic matter or crystallized energy. They were just very, very good conventional engines. But somehow they pushed the ship faster than vessels, using technology that bent the laws of physics. The alien engineers in the crowd began frantically taking notes. When the weapons test began, things got even more interesting. The Thunder's kinetic weapons were simple in concept, but devastating in execution. They fired chunks of metal at incredible speeds, nothing fancy about it. But these simple projectiles tore through target arrays that had shrugged off energy beams and plasma bursts from the previous demonstrations. The alien observers began making worried sounds when the Thunder started the defensive test. Other ships had demonstrated their shields by absorbing predetermined attacks in controlled conditions. The Thunder did something different. It invited the alien observers to actually shoot at it with their best weapons. The Zephyrian crystal ship fired first, sending a beam of pure energy that should have cut the Thunder in half. Instead, the human ship's shields absorbed the impact, and backup systems immediately compensated for any damage. The bioship's corrosive plasma met the same fate, neutralized by adaptive armor that changed its composition in real time. But the real shock came when the ancient Valdorian ship fired its reality-warping weapon. The attack that had made targets simply ceased to exist, struck the Thunder and accomplished nothing. The human ship's defensive systems didn't just absorb the attack, they seemed to understand it, adapt to it, and shrug it off like it was nothing. Commander Lee watched the alien observers through the external cameras. Some were standing up in their seats, others were gesturing frantically at their companions. The translator systems were working overtime as hundreds of different species tried to process what they had just witnessed. 12 minutes, Park said quietly. That's all it took. In 12 minutes, humanity had shown the galaxy something that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through an approach that no one had considered before. The Thunder wasn't the most advanced ship in the demonstration, but it was the most effective. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in the showcase's history, the alien observers had nothing to say. They had expected to see a primitive species fumble with basic technology. Instead, they had witnessed the birth of a new military philosophy that made their ancient doctrines look obsolete. Admiral Park Jinwoo looked out at the stunned faces staring back at him and realized that humanity had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for that change. The sleek alien shuttle docked at Earth's orbital station 7 with barely a whisper. Investigation leader. Thexvol stepped out first, their forearms carrying various scanning devices and recording equipment. Behind them came a team of the galaxy's best minds, engineers, weapons specialists, and technology analysts from 12 different species. They had come here expecting to uncover humanity's secret superweapon, maybe some stolen alien technology or a hidden cache of ancient artifacts. What they found instead was much more disturbing. Chief Engineer Yun Tae-ho was waiting for them at the airlock, wearing a jumpsuit stained with engine grease and sporting a grin that made several aliens uncomfortable. Most species treated military technology like sacred secrets, hidden behind layers of security and bureaucracy. Humans apparently treated it like a hobby they were excited to share. "Welcome to Shipyard 7, Tae-ho said, spreading his arms wide. "You guys want the full tour? I've got to warn you, we're in the middle of retrofitting 3 destroyers, so it's going to be loud and messy." Thexvol's translator struggled with the casual tone. In their experience, military facilities were solemn places run by serious individuals who spoke in technical jargon. This human acted like he was showing off his garage workshop to curious neighbors. The first shock came as they walked through the main assembly bay. Instead of the specialized construction equipment they expected, they saw something that looked more like a giant mechanics shop. Human workers were pulling parts off one ship and installing them on another. Components were labeled with simple numbering systems and color codes that even a child could understand. "See, this is what I mean," Tae-ho said, pointing to a group of technicians swapping out an entire weapon system. "That plasma cannon came off a cruiser, but it fits perfectly on this destroyer. Most alien ships, you can't do that. Each part is custom-made for one specific vessel. We make everything work with everything else." Researcher Vailthon was frantically taking notes, their 3-fingered hands moving rapidly across their datapad. This standardization was completely against conventional military thinking. Specialized equipment was supposed to be superior to generalized systems. Yet somehow, the humans were getting better results. The tour continued deeper into the shipyard, and the aliens' confusion grew with each step. They passed workshops where humans were modifying standard components for specific missions. They saw repair bays, where damaged ships were being fixed, using parts that weren't originally designed for those vessels. Most shocking of all, they witnessed human engineers arguing loudly about the best way to solve problems, with junior technicians openly contradicting their superiors. "This chaos should not produce functional results," whispered analyst Morketh to their colleague. In their species, military hierarchy was absolute, and deviation from established procedures was unthinkable. Technician Kim Hee-jin was working on what appeared to be an impossible repair job when the tour group found her. She had a plasma conduit. That was clearly damaged beyond conventional repair, but instead of replacing it, she was somehow rebuilding it using spare parts from completely different systems. "What are you doing?" asked Vailthon, genuinely curious. Hee-jin looked up from her work, wiping sweat from her forehead. "This conduit is supposed to be scrapped, but we're 3 weeks out from getting replacement parts, so I'm making it work with what we have. See this power coupling from a life support system? It's not rated for plasma flow, but if I modify the voltage regulators and add these heat sinks from an old sensor array, It should handle the load just fine. The alien observers watched in fascination and horror as she continued her work. She was combining components that no manufacturer had ever intended to work together, using installation methods that violated every safety protocol they knew and somehow creating a functioning system from what should have been incompatible junk. This violates 7 different engineering principles, Velathon muttered, checking their notes. 8, actually, Heejin said cheerfully, overhearing the comment. But it works, and that's what matters. We don't have the luxury of perfect conditions out here. Sometimes you have to make things work with what you've got. The investigation team spent 2 more days at the shipyard, documenting everything they saw. They visited the design offices where human engineers sketched out modifications on actual paper. They observed training sessions where crew members were taught to repair their ships using improvised methods. They interviewed dozens of workers who all seemed to share the same philosophy: make it work, keep it working, and always have a backup plan. By the 3rd day, the aliens were beginning to understand the true scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't about superior technology or hidden weapons. The humans had developed an entirely different approach to building and maintaining their military forces. Where other species created perfect, specialized systems, humans created adaptable, survivable ones. The final revelation came when they asked to see humanity's most advanced warship designs. Taeho led them to a conference room and spread out blueprints that looked surprisingly simple compared to alien designs. There were no exotic power sources, no reality-bending weapons, no crystalline consciousness matrices, just very clever arrangements of conventional technology with backup systems for the backup systems. Most species build ships that work perfectly under ideal conditions, Taeho explained. We build ships that work adequately under terrible conditions. Your ships might be better than ours when everything goes according to plan. But when was the last time everything went according to plan in a real fight? The investigation team returned to the Galactic Council with a report that would change everything. They had expected to find evidence of cheating or theft. Instead, they had discovered something far more dangerous: proof that humanity's entire military philosophy was fundamentally different from everything the galaxy had known. The humans didn't build better weapons. They built weapons that could be fixed, modified, and adapted by ordinary soldiers in the middle of a battle. They didn't create superior ships. They created ships that could survive damage that would cripple any other vessel. Most importantly, they had developed a military culture that valued adaptability over perfection, survival over specialization. As Thexvol compiled their final report, they realized they were documenting the end of an era. For millions of years, galactic warfare had followed predictable rules and patterns. Humanity was about to change all of that, not through superior technology, but through superior thinking. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for such a fundamental shift in the balance of power. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen anything like this. Representatives from over 300 species filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a cacophony that the translation systems struggled to keep up with. The investigation report about human military capabilities had just been distributed, and the reaction was immediate and explosive. Councillor Han Ji-soo sat in the human delegation section, watching the chaos unfold with growing unease. She had been Earth's ambassador to the galaxy for 5 years, handling trade disputes and cultural exchanges. Never in her worst nightmares had she imagined sitting here, while hundreds of alien species debated whether humanity was too dangerous to exist freely. The first speaker to gain the floor was pacifist leader Serenthi of the Crystal Collective. Her species resembled living gemstones, their bodies composed of translucent crystal that glowed with inner light. When she was upset, as she clearly was now, that light flickered like a broken bulb. Honored representatives, Serenthi's voice rang out like musical chimes. We face an unprecedented threat to galactic peace. The human military philosophy is not merely different from ours, it is fundamentally dangerous. They view every piece of technology, every scientific discovery, every peaceful invention as potential weapons material. She gestured to a holographic display showing human shipyards. Look at their methods. They do not build specialized vessels for specific purposes. They build platforms that can be modified, adapted, weaponized at a moment's notice. A human cargo ship can become a warship. A civilian transport can become a troop carrier. Their entire society is organized around the concept that everything can be turned into an instrument of war. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several sections of the chamber. The pacifist species had always been uncomfortable with military technology, but the human approach seemed to violate every principle they held dear. Before Serenthi could continue, a thunderous crash echoed through the chamber. Warlord Krekstar of the Iron Brotherhood had slammed his massive armored fist onto his podium, cracking the reinforced material. His species looked like living tanks, all metal plates and hydraulic joints, and when he spoke, his voice boomed, like artillery fire. "Contamination," he roared. "You call military effectiveness contamination? The galaxy has grown soft under your pacifist philosophies. We face threats from beyond our borders, enemies that do not share your gentle sensibilities. The humans have shown us what real military capability looks like, and instead of celebrating, you want to chain them down." He pointed accusingly at the pacifist section. "For too long we have followed your obsolete doctrines, specialized ships for specialized roles, genteel rules of engagement, warfare conducted like a formal dance. Meanwhile, our enemies grow stronger, while we grow weaker. The humans offer us a chance to remember what it means to fight for survival." The chamber erupted again as the militant species voiced their support. The Korvaxi delegation, with their razor-sharp exoskeletons, chittered their approval. The Thargoid representatives, massive insectoid creatures, buzzed their agreement. Several smaller species that lived in dangerous sectors of the galaxy nodded along, understanding the value of the human approach. But not everyone was convinced. Elder Nyx Vera of the Ancient Compact rose slowly from her seat. Her species was among the oldest in the galaxy, having achieved spaceflight, while most others were still discovering fire. She spoke rarely, but when she did, the entire galaxy listened. "Children," her voice was like wind through ancient trees, "you see only the immediate implications. I have lived through the rise and fall of 12 galactic civilizations. I have watched species destroy themselves through military escalation, through the endless pursuit of better weapons and stronger defenses." She gestured to the human delegation, and Hanji Su felt every eye in the chamber focusing on her. The humans are not evil, but their philosophy represents a fundamental shift in how warfare is conducted. If we allow their methods to spread, if other species begin to adopt their approach, we will trigger an arms race that will tear the galaxy apart. The ancient alien's words carried the weight of eons. "I propose Resolution 2847, the Terran Limitation Accord. Humanity must cease all military vessel production beyond basic defense needs. They must submit their existing warships for standardization according to galactic protocols. Most importantly, they must share their military technology and methods with the Council for proper regulation." Hanji Su felt her heart sink. The proposal wasn't just limiting human military development, it was essentially putting humanity under galactic supervision. It was the kind of restriction typically imposed on conquered species, not equal members of the galactic community. The debate that followed was unlike anything in the Council's history. Trade representatives calculated the economic impact of restricting human military exports. Several smaller species had already contracted with human companies for defensive consultations, and those agreements would be void if the resolution passed. Military advisors ran threat assessments, trying to determine if humanity could actually be contained if they refused to comply. The numbers were not encouraging. Human military doctrine emphasized mobility and adaptability, making them difficult to pin down in a conventional conflict. Philosophers debated the ethics of restricting an entire species' right to self-defense. Some argued that the greater good of galactic peace justified the restrictions. Others countered that forced disarmament was itself an act of aggression. The debate raged for 3 days. Representatives took turns at the podium, each presenting their species' position. The crystalline luminari spoke of harmony and balance. The machine-like synthetics calculated probability matrices. The hive-minded collective shared the thoughts of billions as one voice. Through it all, Han Ji-soo remained largely silent. Her instructions from Earth were clear. Listen, observe, and report back. Do not commit to anything. Do not agree to any restrictions. But also do not openly threaten or antagonize the Council. It was an impossible position. She watched as species that had been humanity's friends and trading partners gradually moved toward supporting the restrictions. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the investigation report had genuinely frightened many of the galaxy's peaceful civilizations. On the final day, the vote was called. Representatives inserted their voting crystals into the slots at their seats. The central display showed the tally in real time: red for opposition, blue for support, yellow for abstention. The count was painfully close. Several species changed their votes multiple times as the tally shifted back and forth. In the end, Resolution 2847 passed by just 12 votes out of over 600 cast. Han Ji-soo watched the final tally appear on the display and felt a chill run down her spine. The Terran Limitation Accord was now galactic law. Humanity had become the first species in Council history to have military restrictions imposed on them, while still being considered a member in good standing. As the session ended and representatives began filing out, Han Ji-soo activated her secure communicator. Earth needed to know immediately that the galaxy had just declared them too dangerous to be trusted with their own defense. The real question was how humanity would respond to this unprecedented limitation of their sovereignty. Knowing her own species as she did, Han Ji-soo suspected the answer would not be what the Council wanted to hear. The massive Council chamber had never felt so tense. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in complete silence, watching Ambassador Kang Min-ho as he walked slowly to the central podium. In his hands, he carried the official copy of Resolution 2847, the document that would supposedly end humanity's military independence forever. Kang had been Earth's chief diplomat for over a decade, skilled at finding compromise in the most difficult situations. He had negotiated trade agreements, resolved territorial disputes, and built bridges between species that had been enemies for centuries. But today was different. Today there would be no diplomacy, no careful words, no political maneuvering. He placed the document on the podium with deliberate care, the sound of paper against metal somehow audible throughout the vast chamber. Every alien eye was focused on him, waiting to see how humanity would respond to this unprecedented restriction on their sovereignty. Honored representatives of the Galactic Council, Kang began, his voice calm and measured. I have reviewed Resolution 2847 thoroughly. I have consulted with my government, with our military leaders, and with the elected representatives of every human colony. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Some of the alien representatives leaned forward in their seats, expecting to hear terms for compliance, perhaps negotiations about implementation timelines or compromise positions. The United Earth government's response is simple, Kang said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. No. The single word hit the chamber like a physical blow. Absolute silence followed, broken only by the hum of translation devices, working overtime as they processed the implications of what they had just heard. Councillor Thexval was the first to recover from the shock. The investigation leader who had visited Earth's shipyards leaned forward urgently. Ambassador Kang, you must understand that this is galactic law now. The resolution has passed by proper vote. You are required to comply, we never agreed, to laws that restrict our fundamental right to self-defense, Admiral Park Jin-woo interrupted, stepping forward to stand beside the ambassador. His military uniform looked stark and practical compared to the flowing robes and ornate armor worn by alien representatives. Earth hereby withdraws from all military cooperation agreements, effective immediately. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives began shouting in dozens of different languages, their translators struggling to keep up with the overlapping voices. Some demanded explanations, others threatened consequences, and a few simply sat in stunned silence. Elder Nix Vera, of the Ancient Compact, rose slowly from her seat, her ancient voice somehow cutting through the noise. You cannot simply ignore the will of the galactic community. There will be consequences for this defiance. Kang nodded respectfully to the elder. We understand that, and we accept the consequences, but we will not allow any external authority to dictate how we defend our people and our worlds. Within 6 hours of the announcement, the galaxy began to fracture along lines that had never existed before. The response was swift and harsh. The Merchant Guild, controlled by species that favored stability above all else, imposed immediate trade sanctions on all human colonies. Overnight, cargo ships carrying essential supplies were turned away from human ports. The Defense Pact, the Galaxy's primary military alliance, recalled all their liaison officers from human facilities. Joint training exercises were cancelled, shared intelligence networks were shut down, and humans found themselves locked out of the communication systems they had helped build. 3 entire star systems declared their borders closed to human vessels. The Zephyrian Confederacy, still smarting from being outperformed at the military demonstration, announced that any human ship entering their territory would be treated as a hostile force. But something unexpected happened in the Outer Rim territories, far from the Council's influence. Here, smaller species and independent colonies faced constant threats from pirates, raiders, and hostile neighbors. They had watched the military demonstration with different eyes than the great powers. While the Council saw a threat to galactic stability, the Outer Rim saw salvation. Captain Oh Hyun-wook was conducting routine patrol exercises with his crew aboard the Thunder when the first message arrived through encrypted channels. The Kepler Mining Collective, a small operation on the edge of known space, had a problem. Raiders had been hitting their transports, and the local authorities were either unable or unwilling to help. "They're offering us a consultation contract," his communications officer reported. "Full payment in rare minerals, no questions asked about our methods." Oh studied the message carefully. It was exactly the kind of work that the Council had tried to prevent. Human military expertise being sold to whoever could afford it, spreading their dangerous philosophy to species across the galaxy. "Seems our reputation precedes us," he told his crew with a slight smile. "Set course for the Kepler system. Let's see what we can do for our new clients." The contract was just the beginning. Within weeks, similar requests began flooding in from across the Outer Rim. Independent colonies wanted defensive consultations. Merchant groups needed escort services. Small governments requested training for their security forces. All of them had heard about the human military philosophy, and all of them wanted to learn. The galaxy was splitting into 2 distinct camps. On one side stood the established order, the great powers, the ancient civilizations, the species that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. They had the Council's backing, control of major trade routes, and overwhelming numerical superiority. On the other side was humanity and a growing collection of unlikely allies. Small species that had been ignored by the great powers. Independent colonies that valued self-reliance over security. Merchant groups that cared more about results than regulations. They were vastly outnumbered, but they had something the establishment lacked: adaptability. The irony was not lost on human observers. The Council had tried to contain humanity's military philosophy by isolating them. Instead, they had created exactly the conditions where that philosophy would spread most rapidly. The Outer Rim species were desperate, under constant threat, and willing to try anything that might help them survive. Back on Earth, government officials monitored the situation with growing concern and quiet satisfaction. Concern because humanity was now effectively at odds with most of galactic civilization. Satisfaction because their principles remained intact and their capabilities were finding new markets. "They wanted to limit our influence," one official remarked during a classified briefing. "Instead, they've given us a whole new customer base." The galactic split was complete, but it was far from stable. Both sides were preparing for what might come next, and neither was entirely sure what that would look like. The only certainty was that the galaxy had changed forever, and there was no going back to the way things used to be. In the Outer Rim, Captain Oh Hyun-wook completed his first consultation contract with remarkable success. The Kepler Mining Collective's raider problem was solved. Their defenses were strengthened, and their security teams were trained in human tactical doctrine. Word spread quickly through the underground networks that connected the galaxy's forgotten corners. Humanity had found its new place in the galaxy, not as part of the established order, but as the champions of everyone the establishment had left behind. The first warning came from an automated deep space monitoring station on the edge of the galaxy. The message was short and terrifying. Unknown contacts emerging from dark space. Massive energy signatures. Hostile behavior confirmed. Request immediate. Then silence. The Devourer swarm had awakened after sleeping for 1,000 years in the void between galaxies. They moved like a plague of mechanical locusts, consuming everything in their path. Entire star systems disappeared, as the swarm stripped planets down to their cores, feeding on raw matter to fuel their endless reproduction. The Galactic Council responded exactly as their protocols demanded. They assembled the largest fleet in recorded history, with representatives from every major military power. Crystal ships from the Collective hummed with stored energy. Bio-vessels from the verdant worlds pulsed with organic weaponry. The ancient Valdorian fleet prepared reality-warping technologies that had defended the galaxy for millions of years. Admiral Vextar of the Hegemony took overall command, his massive dreadnought serving as the fleet's flagship. He was a veteran of dozens of conflicts, trained in every aspect of conventional galactic warfare. His battle plans followed strategies that had been refined over millennia, tested against every known threat. The Council fleet met the Devourer, swarm at the Kepler defense line, a strategic choke point that should have allowed them to funnel the enemy into predetermined kill zones. It should have been a textbook victory for organized military doctrine over chaotic alien aggression. Instead, it became the greatest military disaster in galactic history. The Devourers didn't follow any recognizable patterns. They adapted to every tactic, learned from every weapon fired at them, and evolved countermeasures in real time. When the crystal ships fired their energy beams, the swarm absorbed the energy and used it to power new weapons. When the bioships released their organic plagues, the Devourers incorporated the biological material into their own systems. Most horrifying of all, they learned. Each destroyed Devourer unit transmitted its combat data to the others before dying, making the entire swarm more effective with every engagement. The conventional formations that had worked for millions of years became death traps as the enemy predicted every move. Admiral Vextar's final transmission captured the horror of the situation. They adapt to everything we throw at them. Conventional tactics are useless. Energy weapons only make them stronger. Formation flying allows them to predict our movements. We require immediate. The signal cut off as his flagship disappeared into the swarm's hungry embrace. Within 6 hours, the entire Council fleet had been destroyed or scattered. The survivors fled in random directions, abandoning all military discipline in their desperation to escape. The galaxy faced extinction. The Devourer swarm continued its advance, now armed with weapons technology absorbed from the destroyed fleet. Nothing seemed capable of stopping them as they moved toward the populated core worlds where billions of civilians waited helplessly. In the Council's emergency session, panic ruled the chamber. Representatives shouted over each other, proposing increasingly desperate solutions. Some suggested evacuating entire sectors. Others wanted to attempt diplomatic contact with the swarm. A few extreme voices even suggested using planet killer, weapons on inhabited worlds to deny resources to the enemy. That's when a single message reached their emergency frequency. The voice was calm, professional, completely at odds with the hysteria filling the chamber. "This is Captain Oh-Hyun-wook aboard the UES Thunder. We're 3 hours out from the engagement zone. Please transmit all available tactical data on enemy, capabilities and behavior patterns." The chamber fell silent. Counselor Thexful, the same alien who had investigated human shipyards months earlier, whispered into his communicator, "You came. After everything we did to you, you still came." Commander Lee So-min's voice came back over the channel, as matter-of-fact as if she were discussing the weather. "We protect the galaxy. That includes everyone in it." The human fleet that arrived was smaller than anyone expected. Just 12 ships, led by the Thunder and supported by vessels that had been providing security services in the Outer Rim. They looked tiny compared to the massive dreadnoughts that the Devourers had already destroyed, but size wasn't everything. The final battle lasted 18 hours and became the stuff of legend. Instead of following predictable formations, the human ships moved like a school of fish, constantly changing direction and speed, in patterns that seemed random but somehow coordinated. They fired weapons in seemingly chaotic sequences that confused the swarm's learning algorithms. When the Devourers adapted to kinetic weapons, the humans switched to energy beams. When energy weapons were absorbed, they went back to kinetics, but from different angles and ranges. They used their own ships as bait, leading parts of the swarm into carefully planned ambushes, where concentrated fire could overwhelm the enemy's adaptive defenses. Most importantly, they refused to be predictable. Every time the swarm thought it had learned their patterns, the humans changed tactics completely. They used damaged ships as improvised weapons, ramming them into enemy formations loaded with explosives. They coordinated attacks across impossible distances, using communication methods that the Devourers couldn't intercept or understand. The turning point came when Captain O realized something that the conventional military minds had missed. The Devourers' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They learned from every encounter, but they could only process so much information at once. If they were hit with enough different tactics simultaneously, their adaptive systems would overload. The human fleet scattered across the entire engagement zone, each ship using completely different approaches. One vessel used rapid-fire projectiles, while another employed slow, powerful energy pulses. A third ship focused on electronic warfare, while a fourth used purely kinetic ramming attacks. The Devourers' learning systems crashed under the overload of conflicting data. When the last Devourer unit fell silent, drifting dead in space, the galaxy's survivors could barely believe what they had witnessed. The threat that had destroyed, the combined might of galactic civilization, had been defeated by 12 human ships, using tactics that shouldn't have worked according to any military textbook. The aftermath was unlike anything in galactic history. Species that had imposed sanctions on humanity suddenly found themselves desperate to understand human military methods. The same techniques they had tried to ban were now their only hope of defending against future threats. 3 months later, Ambassador Kang Min-ho returned to the Council chambers for the first time since humanity's defiant rejection of the Terran Limitation Accord. The chamber was packed, but the atmosphere was completely different from that earlier confrontation. Where there had once been fear and suspicion, there was now respect and gratitude. Kang carried no ultimatums or demands for revenge. Instead, he presented a simple treaty that recognized humanity's role as the galaxy's defenders, while respecting their independence and methods. "We never wanted to be your military," he told the assembled representatives. "We don't want to conquer anyone or impose our will on other species, but we understand that sometimes the galaxy needs protection from threats that conventional methods can't handle. When that happens, we'll be here." The Terran Limitation Accord was formally dissolved in a unanimous vote. In its place, the galaxy established a new understanding. Humanity would remain independent, free to develop their military capabilities as they saw fit. In return, they would serve as the galaxy's last line of defense against existential threats. It wasn't the relationship anyone had expected, but it was the one the galaxy needed. Sometimes the greatest protectors are the ones who refuse to be controlled, who think differently, who adapt when others cannot. The Devourer War had taught the galaxy a harsh lesson about the difference between having powerful weapons and knowing how to use them effectively. Humanity had both, and that made all the difference when survival was on the line.